They called it the twin-boom death trap. The Japanese pilots thought the P-38 could never outturn a Zero. But one tiny modification, a 6-inch piece of piano wire, quietly flipped the aerial balance. What happens next is a secret that cost lives to uncover. Stay with us, because at the end, you'll see how a rookie pilot in the Pacific rose from 0 kills to ace in one morning and made history. The aircraft that would become known as the Lockheed P-38 Lightning was born of bold ambition. In 1937, the United States Army Air Corps issued a specification for an interceptor capable of high-altitude performance. Climb fast, fly fast, hunt enemy aircraft that might threaten bomber formations. The design team at Lockheed Corporation under Kelly Johnson and Hall Hibbard responded with something radical: twin engines, twin booms, a central cockpit nacelle, large superchargers. The twin-boom layout stood out like nothing else in the sky at that time. The 2 engine nacelles each housed a turbo-supercharged Allison V1710 engine, with the booms extending back to tail surfaces and a central pod carrying the pilot and the armament. This configuration allowed long range, better altitude performance, and steep climb, all features essential in the vast Pacific theater. Indeed, the P-38 became one of the few fighters able to escort bombers far into enemy territory over water, using its twin-engine reliability, drop tanks, and long legs. Its armament was formidable. Early Lightnings carried 4 .50-caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon grouped in the nose, delivering concentrated fire without convergence issues. Combined with high speed, decent climb rate, and the tactical flexibility of twin engines, it seemed destined for dominance in the Pacific skies. And yet in dogfights, the P-38 began to show a troubling weakness. Despite everything going for it, the P-38 had a fatal shortcoming in certain combat situations. According to its historical record, early variants could not outturn the A6M Zero and most other Japanese fighters when flying below 200 miles per hour. In the close-in maneuvering, fight the brawl of the turning dog, fight the P-38's large size, twin-engine mass, and long wings meant roll rate and instantaneous control feel lagged behind the nimble, single-engine fighters of the Japanese Navy. Even if the aircraft was fast, climbed well, and had firepower, if it found itself locked into a turning engagement at low speed, it was at a disadvantage. That disadvantage was more than theoretical. In the dense air of the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and other Pacific battlegrounds, dogfights often boiled down to who could roll, reverse, get inside the turn faster, and here the P-38's strengths were exposed as weaknesses. It was built to fight on terms of altitude, speed, and power, not on the terms of a slow-speed turning duel. The doctrine for its employment reflected that, but doctrine and reality often diverged, and the aircraft's hidden weakness would cost lives. In short, the Lightning had the promise of a predator, but deep down the trap was set. An aircraft built to dominate high-altitude, high-speed interception, but vulnerable when forced into tight engagements its design wasn't optimized for. Against the P-38's sleek twin-boom silhouette rose the shadow of its adversary, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Introduced in 1940, this Japanese naval fighter was built for a different kind of war. Light, agile, long-ranged, and deadly in maneuvering fights, the Zero earned a fearsome reputation early in the Pacific War. The Zero's design priorities were clear: minimal weight, generous lift, excellent low-speed handling, and outstanding turning ability. American test pilots discovered just how extreme the Zero's maneuverability was. Its low wing loading, large control surfaces, and light structure allowed it to outturn any Allied fighter of the time. In published accounts, it is described as being built like a fine watch, light and graceful through the air. That maneuverability came at a cost. The Zero lacked armor, lacked self-sealing fuel tanks, and at higher speeds or in diving engagements, it showed limitations in roll rate and in robustness. But in the early years of the war, those shortcomings rarely mattered because Allied fighters often engaged in the wrong way. The doctrine of how to fight a Zero was still evolving. For American units flying the P-38, the official tactic was clear: do not engage a Zero in the kind of turning dogfight it excelled at. The manual and briefing rooms emphasized, Use altitudes and speed. Dive in with the sun behind you. Strike with firepower. Then climb away. Hit and run. Boom and zoom. Avoid turning with the Zero. The P-38's strengths lay in its high-altitude performance and long reach, not in one-on-one turning contests. The Luftwaffe and USAAF had already learned similar lessons in Europe. Yet doctrine alone couldn't guarantee success, and years of combat over New Guinea, the Solomons and elsewhere, exposed how theory and practice diverged brutally. The Zero pilots trained, cunning, aggressive, loved the turning engagements. They baited opponents, reversed inside turns, exploited the delay or sluggishness of heavier aircraft. Allied pilots found themselves caught in dogfights they weren't supposed to enter but ended up in anyway due to the chaos of war. Losses began to mount. P-38 pilots reported that when they ended up in a turning fight, the Zero could slip inside their turning radius, get a shot, finish the fight. The doctrine was failing because the engagements didn't always allow the ideal conditions of altitude and speed. The P-38 could run, dive, climb, but if cornered, it wasn't agile like the Zero. The trap that had been built into the design, built because the operational theory had focused on high-altitude interception, now threatened to become reality. In the skies above New Guinea, the Japanese fighters discovered that the American Lightnings were great at long range, but what happened when they were forced down to lower altitude, trimmed of energy, into tighter maneuvers? The Zero was waiting, and the Americans began to realize the field had shifted. The P-38's promise could turn into vulnerability unless something changed. While the pilots confronted those deadly skies, a quieter struggle unfolded on the ground. On forward airfields in the Pacific, makeshift runways carved from jungle, high humidity, flying debris, and relentless operational tempo maintenance crews watched too. They saw the pilots taxi out in their P-38 seconds, watch takeoffs and landings, watch the return flights, and the ones that didn't come back. Among these ground crews, many dark thoughts circulated. Something was wrong. One of the repeating complaints was familiar. The P-38, which should be fast, responsive, powerful, didn't always feel right in the kind of maneuver when its pilot needed it most. A P-38 might have climbed and dived beautifully, but when the fight got tight, the roll was sluggish, the control felt heavy, the aircraft would lag behind the pilot's commands. Some pilots described the sensation. It felt like it was moving through mud. The stick moved. The aircraft responded slowly. Or, by the time I banked, the Zero was already behind me. Yet when the official reports came in, the verdict was almost always pilot error. The briefing rooms, the formal maintenance logs, the engineering officers they considered the aircraft within specifications. The manuals emphasized the doctrine, the pilots emphasized the tactics, but the losses kept coming. The P-38 squadrons in New Guinea and elsewhere lost aircraft at a rate that concerned the mechanics. They had intimate knowledge of the machines, they signed off the maintenance logs, checked the engine oil levels, aligned the control surfaces, inspected the cables. Many were mechanics who'd worked on cars before the war. They were hands-on, practical, and they could sense when something felt off in the machine. Among the maintenance crew, one issue began to stand out: the aileron control cable system in the P-38's twin-boom design. Because the P-38's tail surfaces were mounted in the booms, the aileron cables on each wing had to run through pulleys and fairings along the booms and eventually through to the control surfaces. This meant a longer run of cable and several transfer points, which introduced slack, delay, and less crisp control feel, especially when the aircraft was flown at lower speeds in tight turning maneuvers. Some mechanics noted that during inspection, the aileron cables had up to 3/8 of an inch of play before tension caught a minor amount on paper. But in a dogfight, that micro delay could mean life or death. They attempted to raise the concern through the chain of command: the engineering officer, the FINI, logbooks, factory tolerances. But the reply came back. Cable tension was within specification. Changing it would void warranties. Field mechanics were not authorized to modify flight control systems. So the issue sat unresolved in the shadows. Meanwhile, pilots continued to fly missions, trusting the machine, trusting their training, but also quietly aware that sometimes the aircraft didn't feel as nimble as they needed. The mechanics knew that they were the ones who would be working on the machines every dawn, the ones who'd see yet another P-38 come back damaged or not at all. They saw the smell of aviation fuel, hot metal, hydraulic fluid, the smell of war in preparation. They felt anxiety. And behind the scenes, one or two began to consider, what if they tried something unofficial? What if they modified the machine anyway? Because the official route was too slow, and the price of waiting was too high. Thus, in the depths of the forward maintenance hangars, the trap was set not just in the air, but on the ground. Mechanics in the shadows saw the problem, felt the machine's weakness, and began to imagine a fix. The pilots above might have been fighting the enemy in the sky, but the real battle was being fought by those on the ground trying to make the P-38 respond like the agile fighter it was supposed to be. The stage was set for a hidden modification, for rules to be broken, and for a turning point that neither pilot nor dogfight expected. The jungle nights in New Guinea were heavy and humid, thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and fear. In the maintenance hangars of WWII airfield, the war never really stopped. While pilots slept or tried to, the mechanics stayed awake, working by the glow of lanterns and the distant hum of generators. Among them was a technical sergeant, whose name would never appear in any official report. He was the kind of man who could feel a machine's problems in his fingertips. He'd been tightening control, cables on P-38 Lightnings for 8 months, and every time he pulled on the aileron line, he could sense it. Slack. Maybe 3/8 of an inch, maybe less, but enough to matter. Enough to delay the roll of an aircraft by a fraction of a second. In a classroom, that delay meant nothing. In a dogfight, it was the difference between life and death. He'd brought it up before to the engineering officer, to the manuals, to anyone who would listen. The answer was always the same. Within specification, factory tolerances, engineering standards. No modifications allowed without Lockheed authorization. The logic made sense on paper, but the paper didn't bleed. The pilots did. And so, one night, he decided that rules written in California didn't apply to a war being fought in New Guinea. From the scrap pile beside a wrecked Lightning, he pulled a 6-inch length of high-tensile piano wire. It was meant for the aircraft's trim system, spring steel, resilient and strong. He sat down on the hangar floor, cross-legged, pliers in hand, and began to bend it. The wire fought back, slicing his thumb open. Blood slicked the metal. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept going. The idea was simple. Shape the wire into a Z that could be inserted in line with the control cable. When installed, it would act as a tensioner, preloading the system and removing the slack. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't authorized. But it would work. He waited until the hangar was silent, the others asleep. He opened the left boom inspection panel of Lieutenant Robert Hayes's P-38. Hayes was a farm kid from Iowa. 6 missions, no kills, haunted eyes. He'd begged the sergeant the night before. There's gotta be something you can do to make her roll faster. Working by flashlight, the mechanic unpinned the control linkage, slipped the Z-shaped wire between the fittings, forced the clevis pin through with the handle of his wrench. When he tested the cable, there was no slack. The aileron moved the instant he pulled. It took 8 minutes that could end his career or save a man's life. He closed the panel, cleaned the blood from his hands, and walked out into the tropical night. Somewhere in the distance, a Zero engine droned. He listened, heart pounding. If the modification failed, Hayes would die. If it worked, he'd have changed the war. And no one, not the officers, not Lockheed, not Washington, would ever know. Morning came with a crimson sun hanging low over the jungle canopy. The airfield roared awake. Fuel trucks, bomb loaders, the chatter of ground crews. At 7:42 a.m., Lieutenant Hayes taxied out in his freshly armed P-38. From beneath the wing, the sergeant watched, pretending to check oil levels, pretending not to feel his heart racing. Hayes throttled up, twin Allisons screaming, and the Lightning leapt down the runway. In seconds, it was airborne, silver against blue, climbing to join the formation, heading northwest, toward the Huon Gulf. The engagement began less than an hour later. Japanese radar had picked up the flight, and 18 A6M Zeros rose to meet them. The fight was uneven from the start. The Americans had altitude, the Japanese had agility. The dance of death was familiar until Hayes rolled into his first turn. He felt it instantly. No hesitation. No lag. The control stick moved, and the wings obeyed. The P-38 snapped around like it had shed its own weight. Hayes dove on a Zero, squeezed the trigger, watched the tracers streak wide. The Japanese pilot rolled away, expecting the lightning to wallow as usual, but it didn't. Hayes followed, rolling inside the Zero's turn, something no P-38 pilot had ever done before. He fired again. The 20mm cannon and 450 cals tore into the Zero's fuselage. It burst apart, scattering across the treetops below. Hayes pulled up hard, eyes wide, disbelief and adrenaline surging. The radio crackled his wingman, shouting that more Zeros were diving from above. He should have run. Doctrine said don't turn with the Zero. But Doctrine didn't know about the piano wire inside his left boom. Hayes rolled left, reversed, snapped upright, and found himself nose to nose with another attacker. He fired a short burst. The Zero's wing folded. The wreckage spiraled past him in flames. 2 kills in under 30 seconds. When Hayes landed at 9-3, the entire flight line had gathered to watch. His flight suit was drenched, his hands shaking. He climbed down from the cockpit, walked straight to the mechanic, and said just 2 words. It worked. He didn't know why the aircraft had changed. He only knew it finally obeyed him. What neither man realized was that high above, 6 other American pilots had witnessed the entire fight. And among them was Captain Frank Mitchell, a squadron leader who knew every P-38 inches the theater and who couldn't believe what he'd just seen. Hayes's Lightning had rolled faster than any aircraft Mitchell had ever flown. Something had changed. The rumor of that change was about to spread like wildfire. By the next day, whispers were circulating through the squadron like contraband. Pilots crowded around Hayes in the briefing tent, asking what he'd done differently. He didn't know only that the airplane rolled like it was reading his mind. Captain Mitchell went straight to the maintenance line and found the mechanic hands black with grease, uniform soaked in sweat. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply asked, "What did you do to that airplane?" The mechanic hesitated, glanced around, and told him the truth. About the piano wire. About the slack. About breaking every regulation in the Army Air Force's manual. Mitchell listened, arms crossed, silent. Then he said, "Can you do it to mine?" That night, under the same dim lights, the mechanic did it again. And when Mitchell took off the next morning, he came back raving. The Lightning rolled faster, felt tighter, more alive. His wingman demanded the same. By week's end, 9 P-38 seconds at Dobadura carried the secret modification. The transformation was immediate. Kill ratios began to shift. Zeros that once danced circles around the twin-boom fighters were now being caught, reversed upon, and destroyed. Between late August and mid-September, 1,943. The numbers spoke for themselves. P-38 losses dropped sharply, and victory claims rose. Pilots noticed it. Japanese pilots noticed it even more. Reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that the American twin-boom fighters were suddenly rolling more quickly and executing reversals with unexpected speed. They didn't understand it. No one did. By September's end, mechanics in other squadrons, Guisap, Oro Bay, Port Moresby, had heard rumors of a tension fix that made the Lightning fight like a different machine. The modification spread through hand-drawn sketches, word of mouth, and nighttime installations. Crews learned to remove the tensioners before inspections, then reinstall them afterward. It became the worst-kept secret in the Southwest Pacific. But officially, nothing had changed. The manuals still warned against unauthorized adjustments. Engineering officers signed off aircraft as within spec. Commanders sent out congratulations for improved performance, but never asked why. The war was tilting quietly, invisibly. A handful of mechanics and pilots had altered the balance of air power with a 6-inch piece of wire. And still, they said nothing. Because if the secret got out too soon, the bureaucracy would kill it long before the enemy could. In the shadows of the Pacific, the hidden fix had taken flight, and there was no turning back. By late August 1943, the skies over New Guinea had changed. Not in color, not in sound, but in something invisible. The Japanese fighter pilots, once so confident, so certain of their dominance in turning fights, began to notice it first. Their finely tuned instincts, honed through years of combat, were suddenly failing them. A Zero pilot could once predict the rhythm of a fight, when a P-38 would roll, when it would hesitate, when the slower Lightning would finally expose its belly for a kill shot. Timing was everything, and the timing no longer worked. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most revered aces, led a patrol over WWII that September morning. He'd fought Americans since the first days of the war, earned 64 confirmed kills. He knew the P-38's weaknesses as well as he knew the feel of his own control stick. When he spotted two Lightnings below, he smiled behind his oxygen mask. He rolled to attack, diving fast, confident as ever. But the P-38 seconds did something he'd never seen before. The lead Lightning rolled and reversed instantly. No sluggish delay, no slow sweep of the wings through the sky. It snapped into a turn so sharp that Sakai almost collided with it head-on. He pulled hard, heart-hammering, tracers slicing past his canopy. He dove for the clouds, shaken. The American had outrolled him. Something was wrong, very wrong. He wasn't alone in noticing. Across the Pacific, Japanese after-action reports began recording strange observations. The twin-boom fighters were maneuvering with unexpected agility. They were reversing direction too quickly for accurate firing. Experienced pilots were missing shots they used to land every time. At first, Japanese intelligence thought it must be a new model. But when they recovered wreckage from downed Lightnings, everything looked the same. Same engines, same armament, same design. No new control surfaces, no new hydraulics, no visible difference. What they didn't realize was that the change was buried deep inside the booms, a 6-inch piece of piano wire, invisible to inspection, indistinguishable from factory fittings. A hidden fix that no technical analysis could reveal. The Japanese pilots grew frustrated, then cautious. The psychological shift was almost immediate. The once fearless Zero squadrons began avoiding P-38 seconds unless they had clear numerical advantage. Veteran pilots who once pressed attacks now hesitated. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and they didn't know why. The twin-boom death trap had been reborn. And all it took was one man with pliers, a flashlight, and the courage to break the rules. The mission orders were simple: sweep the skies north of the Huon Gulf. But for Lieutenant Robert Hayes and his squadron, those words meant something else, entirely bait for the Zeros. By September, the Japanese had begun fighting harder, desperate to regain control of the skies. On that humid morning, Hayes led a flight of 4 P-38 seconds, every one of them modified. The mechanics had worked through the night, installing tensioners, each bent by hand, each hiding beneath a maintenance panel that officially didn't exist. They took off just after dawn, engines roaring against the green canopy below. By the time they reached altitude, vapor trails curled off the wings. Hayes scanned the horizon, heart steady, but tight. Somewhere out there, the enemy was waiting. At 8:14 a.m., they found them, or were found. A dozen Zeros approached head-on, sunlight flashing across their wings. The first pass was chaos tracers, cannon bursts, arcs of smoke. Hayes dove, rolled, and climbed out. His wingman, Parker, shouted over the radio, "2 on your tail." Hayes rolled to brake. But this time, the aircraft answered. It didn't hesitate or wallow. It snapped like a whip. He felt the instant connection, stick, wing, motion, all one. The P-38 came alive under his hands. He reversed and climbed, the Zeros overshooting beneath him. He dropped back down, guns blazing, stitched 1 Zero across the fuselage. Fire erupted. The pilot bailed out too late. Hayes pulled up, rolled again, caught a second Zero trying to flank. Another burst, another kill. The dogfight spun across the sky like a storm. 4 Lightnings against 12 Zeros. But this time, it wasn't a massacre. It was a contest. The Americans fought like men who finally believed they had a chance. Mitchell, flying 2,000 feet above, saw it all. He watched his pilots perform maneuvers no P-38 squadron had ever managed before. Rolling reversals, scissors, snap turns that used to be suicide but now worked. When they landed an hour later, they were exhausted, but alive. 3 kills confirmed, none lost. That night, as darkness fell over the airfield, the pilots didn't celebrate loudly. They just sat in the glow of lanterns, drinking tepid coffee, staring at the stars. Hayes looked over at the mechanic who had changed everything, silent, unassuming, wiping his hands on a rag. "Whatever you did," Hayes said quietly, "it saved all of us today." The mechanic only nodded. He didn't need thanks. The sound of engines returning home was all he ever wanted. By October 1943, the transformation was undeniable. Squadrons using the hidden modification were surviving longer, scoring more kills, and flying with newfound confidence. But it came at a cost, not just in risk, but in secrecy. For weeks, the mechanics lived double lives. By day, they followed regulations, signing maintenance logs within specification. By night, they pulled panels off aircraft, installed piano wire tensioners, and prayed the inspectors wouldn't notice. They'd hide the wires during scheduled checks, reinstall them afterward. They weren't chasing glory, they were chasing survival. Word spread far beyond New Guinea across the 49th Fighter Group, into the 475th, to distant squadrons in the Philippines and Solomons. Pilots whispered about the McKenna fix, though few knew the name of the man who started it. They just knew that their Lightnings rolled cleaner, fought sharper, and brought them home. But the truth couldn't stay buried forever. In late October, an engineering officer at WWII noticed irregular cable tensions during a random inspection. He filed a report. The paper trail climbed through commands, all the way to Lockheed in California. 3 weeks later, a team of engineers arrived to investigate. They tore into one of the modified aircraft, and what they found stunned them. The modification was crude, but brilliant. Simple, safe, effective. Their own calculations confirmed what the mechanics already knew. The added preload improved roll response without compromising safety. It should have been part of the design all along. Lockheed quietly incorporated a version of the modification into the new P-38J model entering production in December 1943. The official documents credited Engineering Review and Control Optimization. The mechanics' names never appeared. No commendations, no medals, no letters home. But among the pilots, the truth lived on. They told the story to new recruits, to fresh mechanics, to anyone who would listen. About a 6-inch piece of piano wire that changed everything. About how innovation sometimes happens not in laboratories, but in dirt floor hangars lit by single bulbs. After the war, most of those men went home. Some became crop dusters, some truck drivers, some mechanics again. The sergeant who started it all ran a small garage in Long Beach until the day he died. On the wall behind his workbench hung a faded black and white photo of a young man in coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning. No caption, no medals. Just quiet proof that a handful of men, without permission, saved hundreds of lives. Because sometimes, victory doesn't come from generals or factories, it comes from the shadows. From those who see a problem, find a solution, and don't wait for permission to do what's right. And the cost of that courage? Silence. But the legacy? Every P-38 that rolled faster. Every pilot who lived to see another dawn. That was the real victory won. No report would ever record